My name is Lindsey Curnutte, and this is On Air with Heritage Action, where we break down in 5 minutes or less how you can get involved today in the fight for conservative values. Hello, welcome back. Today we have a special episode. We have Heritage Action's Government Relations Director, Ryan Walker, with us. Thanks so much for joining us, Ryan.
Thanks for having me on, Lindsey.
So Ryan and his team of the government relations team, they have really the inside knowledge of what's going on the Hill right now. They're talking to the Senate offices, they're talking to the House offices to really see what's happening on Capitol Hill, and they're really the ones getting the first scoop, and they have the really great insight for what's going on right now. So what is going on right now is the spending fight. Every December each year, it seems that we always run into spending and the government funding at the last minute. So I believe government funding runs out December 3rd, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, so December 3rd is our deadline. Walk us through what Democrat leadership is really planning right now and how they plan to fund the government, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsey. Thanks again for having me on. I think the Democrats' sort of playbook this whole year has been to advocate for a full-year omnibus appropriation bill. They wanted to be able to remove Hyde protections for funding for abortions across this country. They wanted to be able to remove border wall funding and immigration fight funding. They wanted to be able to plus up OSHA funding so that they could implement the vaccine mandate and other Democrat priorities. They've been spending the entire year doing that. Luckily, we're now in a position here in December where they don't have the time to do that. And Republicans, because Democrats have been spending money all year, trillions of dollars, in fact. They're refusing to sit down at this table to give them a blank check to spend more money on the federal government. So we're luckily at a time when we are now considering a continuing resolution, a piece of legislation to essentially continue the last administration's funding levels and priorities for some period of time. Unfortunately, this entire week, Democrats have been spending it trying to attach poison pills to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's break down some of those poison pills. I know this CR, we want a clean CR because that, of course, continues the Trump administration's policies, their spending levels and whatnot. We're in favor of that. But talk us through the issues. I know that they have attached some policy writers like funding for unaccompanied children at the southern border, money for Afghan refugees held overseas, and then the most complex issue, I would argue, is the Paygo spending caps and Medicare spending bit. So let's start with that one, since that is the most complex one. Break us through, or break down what Paygo is and what we really need to know about it.
Yeah, Paygo is complex, and Democrats have been insisting on adding this to the CR this year, which we think most Americans would disagree with. Starting in 2011, for some number of years thereafter, Congress has passed rules and provisions that dictate how much spending the government can do. They set caps on all of the discretionary spending for our government every year. They've been doing it, again, since 2010, 2011, so they knew going into their spending this year under the American Rescue Plan that they could break those caps. They spent $2 trillion on that bill, and what do you know? They broke the caps. So based on those laws that were passed in 2010 and 2011, the Budget Control Act and the Paygo Statutory Act, that now triggers an automatic cut in mandatory spending. So Democrats, because of their spending on the American Rescue Plan that really just lit a fire under inflation and torched every wallet of every family here in this country this whole year, instead of focusing on that, they now want Republicans to come in on the back end of their massive spending bills and bail them out, to vote to waive these Paygo requirements so that those cuts are not made. And what we're saying is that Republicans shouldn't agree to that. They shouldn't go along with bailing out Democrats for their very clear understanding of what the implications were of this spending, but going forward with it anyway.
Yeah, so that American Rescue Plan that you mentioned, that was something like $1.9 trillion, is that correct?
That's right.
And that was back in March, February timeframe?
That's right, in March.
So that was their big spending plan there, really calling it the American Rescue Plan. But like you said, it really added to inflation, and kind of we're seeing the effects of that plan now. But What's the deal with the Medicare aspect of it? I've heard that some news reports have said Medicare is going to be cut, and kind of what's going on there, whose fault is it, that sort of thing.
That's a great question. So the cuts, the automatic cuts that are required, have to go after mandatory spending programs, and that, defined by law, includes Medicare. So a major portion of those automatic cuts would come from the Medicare program. And instead of Democrats having to own that blunder on their own, again, a situation they got themselves into by spending too much money, they want Republicans to bail them out on that and prevent those cuts from happening. And what we're simply saying is that Democrats should have to carry that burden on their own and explain to the American public why they're having to take that vote.
Because of that $1.9 trillion bill we mentioned before.
That's
I think
right.
basically, if you really want to put this into the shortest amount of time, basically Democrats spent too much money with that American Rescue Plan, and now they're needing to have these mandatory programs like Medicare cut, and they're trying to kind of pass the buck on that, it seems like.
Absolutely. And what makes it worse is that the way they have written this Paygo exemption would include the Build Back Better Act. So it is essentially voting to allow for the funding of the Build Back Better Act. And so we have a firm conviction that Republicans shouldn't support this.
And that Build Back Better Act isn't really needed right now. I think we argue that it's really an onslaught of just liberal priorities. I don't think it's really focused on helping Americans right now who are struggling. I mean, it's got that salt deduction cap increase. They're basically paying off their campaign donors, it seems like, with a lot of these provisions.
Oh yeah, they want to include a provision to allow millionaire property owners in high tax states to get a tax break. They want to employ thousands of climate activists across the country to go out and be activists for Democrats.
Government-funded activism right there.
Government-funded
Right.
activism. It is a true marriage of the nonprofit organizations that they all fund. And then they want to include funding for the IRS, increased agents, 70,000 of them.
Such a priority right now, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Go after the average American's bank accounts.
It's just crazy. So that's the one issue. That's the bigger issue, this Paygo and what's going on with that. But what are some of the other poison pills that are in this, and what are the Democrats really planning here, that sort of thing?
Yeah. The Paygo is the most complicated, obviously. The other two are very direct, but equally as important. The first is they want to include funding for unaccompanied minors that are coming across the border. These are children. Most of them are no longer children. They are of adult age. They have falsified documents. They come across on their own validity or with the help of cartels, drug cartels on the Mexican side of the border. And they want to include funding in this CR, this continuing resolution, to allow HHS, Health and Human Services department in our government, to house these folks. And it's our opinion that by including funding to allow for the housing of these illegal immigrants, that you're exacerbating the Biden border crisis, that you are not holding this administration to account. You are simply throwing money at the problem. You are not demanding that the administration re-implement Trump-era rules and regulations on the border so that those folks could be turned away. So it is truly exacerbating the Biden border crisis.
Definitely.
And the last thing is the Democrats want to include a provision or a set of funding that goes for resettlement of Afghan refugees. I think it's very important that we highlight that most of the funding here would not be for vetting these individuals, to go out and search for their backgrounds, to understand where they came from, to learn if they were actually an ally of ours or a translator or provided some sort of needed help there on the ground in Afghanistan to our many service members that were there for a number of years. There's no vetting. These folks are coming over. They are being housed at DOD installations across this country. They are given parole by the administration and are allowed to leave those facilities at any time and walk into the interior of the country and to establish their lives. There would be no accountability, no check on them, no verification that these individuals are who they say they are, that they don't have bad intentions, and that they aren't here for nefarious purposes. So those three things all combined are trying, the Democrats are attempting to add to the CR. And we really feel Republicans have an opportunity here. They need 10 Republicans on the Senate side to join them in passing this piece of legislation and to fund the government. And I think that we believe that Republicans should say no.
Definitely.
These three things need to come out, and it should stay a clean CR.
And the next part of this process is the Senate vote. I think it's either today or tomorrow.
That's
correct?
right. That's
Before
right.
that December 3 deadline.
That's right. We expect it Friday.
Okay, great. So those are the three main things that we want removed from the bill. That's kind of what action items are. We need everyone to be calling their senators to say, hey, these are three things that the Democrats are adding that we need stripped from this bill. We need that clean CR that carries over the Trump administration policies. So that's the Paygo waivers, funding for unaccompanied minors, and funding for the Afghan resettlement, correct?
That's right.
Great. So that's kind of the action item for today. There's still time left in this fight. It's maybe slipping under the radar of some Americans. This isn't on cable news every day. So we're giving you kind of the inside scoop, what's going on. And what you really need to be doing right now is calling your senators, asking them to reject these three Democrat provisions, having these stripped from the final bill. So you can really do a lot here. You can be calling your senator's office. You can tweet at them, write letters to the editor. We are under a bit of a time crunch with this week, but every call matters. Every contact that you're making with your senators really matters here. The main thing, Congress should pass that clean CR, correct?
Pass that clean CR, call your senators. The
Great.
call matters.
Yes, they definitely do. And to figure out who your members of Congress are, who your senators are in your state, we have kind of all that information at heritageaction.com/action, You can learn more about the spending process as well. We have some information there as well. But that's the kind of the action item for tonight and for today is stop the CR with these bad policy writers and pass that clean CR.
That's
Great.
it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ryan, and breaking that down. Your insight's definitely valuable to us.
Thanks, Lindsey.
That's it for another episode of On Air with Heritage Action. Thank you for tuning in. Share this episode with your friends and be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Rumble to stay in the know and up to date with Heritage Action. And one last thing, if you'd like to get updates on the podcast sent straight to your phone, text podcast to 51776. That's podcast to 51776.